Road trip. That's
The story I'm sharing is one of those things that doesn't have a neat explanation. It remains the single most bizarre event of my life, and I don't know anyone with a tale to top it. For me, true peace is found on a mountain road after midnight. Imagine the crisp, pine-scented air rushing in, the world reduced to a tunnel of light carved out by your headlights on a twisting ribbon of asphalt. That's my sanctuary, where everything else just melts away. Up there, you rarely see another car. The local sheriff has better things to do. It's a playground of freedom, and I'm not one to let that go to waste. My dad's restored '69 Mustang is my partner in crime. It's a beast, pure American muscle. I'm not a maniac behind the wheel. I don't push things to a dangerous edge, but sometimes you just have to let that V8 engine sing the song it was born to sing. It's a feeling you can't replicate. This particular night was made for it. I was just letting the car glide through the turns, completely lost in the moment. I didn't have the radio on. The passenger seat was vacant. The only soundtrack I needed was the guttural roar of the engine bouncing off the rock faces and the sharp whistle of wind cutting past the window frame. In those moments, the world and its problems cease to exist. It's pure, unadulterated freedom. I can't explain what happened next, but a sudden impulse, sharp and undeniable, told me to turn off onto an old, unpaved logging trail I'd passed 100 times. You know that feeling, a powerful gut instinct that you can't articulate, but you know with absolute certainty that you have to follow it, that ignoring it would haunt you. That was it. So I listened. I slowed the Mustang and veered onto the gravel path, the tires crunching as they left the smooth asphalt. The trail was tight, flanked by a dense wall of pine trees. It was the perfect place to feel the car's raw power on a loose surface. I gave it some gas, letting the rear end slide just a little through the corners, kicking up a plume of dust behind me. The world was silent, save for my engine. I was utterly alone. Or so I thought. My headlights caught something in the path ahead, something that didn't belong. I stomped on the brakes, the car fishtailing slightly on the loose gravel before coming to a halt just feet away. Bathed in the high beams was a single wooden rocking chair. It sat perfectly centered in the trail, as if placed there for an audience. It wasn't new. The wood was dark and weathered, almost black in the stark light. The sight was so profoundly strange, so out of context, that it completely short-circuited my brain. A rocking chair, here in the middle of a forgotten logging trail in the dead of night. It made no sense. Every instinct screamed at me to throw the car in reverse and get out of there, but a deeper, more foolish curiosity took hold. I had to understand. I killed the engine, and the sudden silence was deafening, broken only by a lone cricket. I stepped out onto the gravel, the cool, thin mountain air instantly raising goosebumps on my arms. The only sound was the metallic pinging of the Mustang's cooling manifold. I approached the chair cautiously, my footsteps sounding unnaturally loud on the loose stones. It was just an old rocking chair, empty and still, its wood worn smooth by time and weather. There was nothing on it, nothing around it. It was just there. After a moment of staring, convinced of its mundane absurdity, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. I turned to retreat to the safety of my car. That's when I heard it. A sharp snap of a twig from the impenetrable darkness of the woods to my right. My head whipped around just as two shapes detached themselves from the shadows. They weren't walking, they were running, a dead sprint aimed right at me. My blood turned to ice. There was no thought, only pure, primal fear. I scrambled back, fumbling with the door handle, and threw myself inside, jamming the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life just as they reached me. One of them, a tall, lanky shape, stopped short. The other, however, ran without breaking stride, slamming headlong into the passenger door with a sickening wet thud. He didn't try to stop, didn't even put his hands up. He just hit it, his head bouncing off the metal. Our eyes met through the glass, and the world just stopped. I was paralyzed. He stared, but it felt like he was looking through me. His eyes were wide and milky, rimmed with red. His clothes were shredded, hanging off a gaunt frame, and his hair was matted with pine needles and something dark. His face was pale and smeared with grime, but his expression, it was a horrifying blankness, a total absence of emotion. That was the most terrifying thing I have ever witnessed. A dark stain was spreading across his thin shirt, but he seemed completely oblivious to it. His gaze remained locked on mine as he slowly raised a hand and pressed his face against the window, his breath fogging the glass. That broke the spell. I slammed the shifter into drive, cranked the wheel, and floored it, spraying gravel as I shot past the rocking chair and back toward the main road. The drive down the mountain was a blur. My hands shook on the wheel, my mind a whirlwind of terror and a strange misplaced guilt. That man was hurt, and I just fled. But going back was unthinkable. I managed to dial the county sheriff, my voice unsteady as I relayed the location of the logging trail. The dispatcher sounded bored, but assured me they'd send a car to check things out. Pulling into my garage felt like reaching a sanctuary. I cut the engine and sat in the ringing silence for a full minute before getting out to see the damage. I had to know. The garage light revealed a shallow but obvious dent in the passenger door right where he'd hit. But that wasn't what made my stomach clench. A long greasy smear stained the window where his face had been, and on the door itself below the handle was a perfect handprint in a thick, dark, rust-colored substance that could only be blood. It wasn't a splatter, it was a deliberate, solid print. The sheer wrongness of it all was more disturbing than a violent spray would have been. The next morning, my dad saw the car before I could clean it. He went ballistic. That Mustang is his baby, the result of years of painstaking restoration. He didn't even let me get a word in. It was a tirade about my recklessness, my disrespect for his property, the cost of matching the vintage paint. I tried to explain that I hadn't been careless, that something truly bizarre had happened, but he wouldn't hear it. To him, the dent and the bloody handprint were just evidence of a joyride gone wrong. He probably thought I'd hit an animal and was making up a story. He calmed down eventually, after I scrubbed that handprint off myself, and he listened with a worried look on his face. But my late-night drives in his car were officially over for the foreseeable future. I've tried to rationalize it. The easy explanation is they were squatters living in the woods trying to stage a robbery by luring someone out with that chair. I was just the fish that got away. The sheriff's office never called me back, which I suppose isn't surprising. But that explanation doesn't sit right. It doesn't account for the vacant look in that man's eyes, or the way he ran into my car without an ounce of self-preservation. It felt less like a trap and more like something else, something I don't have a name for. This all went down a few years ago. I drive the big rigs for a living, and after more than a decade on the road, you get a feel for the rhythm of the long, empty nights. This one was no different. I was hauling a load through the high desert, on a stretch of asphalt that connects two dots on a map with nothing but sagebrush and silence in between. It's the kind of place where the stars feel close enough to touch, and your own engine is the only sound for 100 miles. You start to feel like the last man on earth out there. I was probably halfway through my overnight leg when I clocked it. I happened to glance in my passenger side mirror and saw a single lonely headlight bouncing along in the distance. It wasn't another truck but a smaller vehicle, maybe an old pickup. It wasn't tailgating or driving erratically, it just hung back, maintaining a steady, almost polite distance. But it was definitely shadowing me. For the better part of an hour, every time I checked my mirrors, there it was, that one wobbly headlight, a constant presence. It never tried to overtake, even when I slowed down through the long, open passing lanes. It just stayed there, a persistent, silent partner in the dark. My first thought was that it was just a timid driver, someone spooked by the size of my rig and afraid to pass. I wrote it off, but after 30 or 40 miles of this, that theory started to wear thin. Nobody is that cautious. I'm not a paranoid person, but a quiet alarm bell was starting to go off in the back of my head. Still, I had a schedule to keep and a delivery to make. I couldn't waste time playing games with some mystery vehicle. I put it out of my mind, or at least I tried to. but my eyes kept flicking back to that mirror, checking for that single unwavering light. The constant presence was starting to get under my skin, a low-grade irritation that was slowly building. Sometime after 2 a.m., I saw a sign for a small historical marker turnout and decided to pull over. It was little more than a gravel patch carved out of the desert, with a faded plaque I couldn't read in the dark. My plan was to get out, walk around for a second, and more importantly, force the vehicle behind me to finally pass and be on its way. But as I slowed to a stop, I watched in my mirror as the pickup pulled in behind me. It didn't park near me, but way over on the other side of the turnout, killing its one headlight and sinking into the shadows. That's when my annoyance curdled into a cold, hard knot of dread. This wasn't random. I swung myself down from the cab, my boots crunching on the gravel. I wasn't angry anymore. I was just determined to figure out what was going on. I started walking toward the dark shape of the pickup, my heart pounding a little harder with each step. They must have seen me coming. Before I was even halfway across the lot, the engine coughed to life with a rough guttural roar. The truck fishtailed as it shot out of the turnout, spraying rocks and dust. It rocketed past me and onto the highway, its one working taillight shrinking into the vast darkness until it was gone. I stood there for a moment in the sudden, deafening silence. Part of me was just glad it was over. The weirdness was gone, and I could get back to my job. But another larger part of me was deeply shaken. I now had zero doubt they had been following me, and the fact they fled the second I tried to approach them meant their intentions weren't good. The whole thing left me feeling drained and rattled. The last thing I wanted was to get back behind the wheel. I figured a quick power nap was in order. Just an hour to clear my head and let the adrenaline settle before I finished my run at dawn. I did a quick check of my rig, made sure the trailer was secure and the locks were solid, then climbed back inside. I leaned the seat back, cracked a window for some of the cool desert air, and closed my eyes. The absolute quiet of the turnout was a comfort, and my exhaustion took over quickly. I was probably out in less than 5 minutes. I should mention, you don't last in this job without learning to sleep with one ear open. Every strange sound at a truck stop or a lonely turnout could mean trouble. Your truck is your home and your livelihood, and you learn to protect it. It's like a sixth sense you develop over the years. So when a faint, rhythmic scraping sound pulled me from my sleep about an hour later, I was instantly awake. It was a quiet, metallic noise, like something being dragged across pavement. I didn't move a muscle. I slowly, carefully, tilted my head and peered through a crack in the window blind. My blood ran cold. 2 figures were crouched by the rear tires of my trailer. They were working quietly, methodically. One was holding a small, dim phone light, while the other was trying to jam a long piece of metal, maybe a tire iron, into the wheel well. I couldn't see their faces, but I knew exactly what they were doing. They were trying to disable my rig. I don't carry a weapon, but my entire life was tied up in that truck and its cargo. I wasn't about to let them take it. As I watched, one of them gave the tire iron a hard shove. That was it for me. On pure instinct, I slammed my hand down on the center of the steering wheel. The truck's air horn exploded into the night, a deafening blast that echoed across the desert. The effect was immediate. The 2 figures shot up as if they'd been electrocuted, dropping the tool with a clatter. They scrambled away from the truck, disappearing into the thick brush along the side of the road. Not 5 seconds later, headlights cut through the darkness from down the highway. It was the same pickup, driving without its lights on until that moment. It swerved to the shoulder, the 2 figures jumped in, and it sped off into the night. The whole thing was over before I could even get my door open. Once my hands stopped shaking, I called the state troopers. I wasn't expecting them to catch anyone, but I needed to report it. A couple of troopers showed up about an hour later and helped me go over the rig. We found deep gouges in the sidewalls of 2 of my trailer tires, right where the men had been working. The troopers said it was a known tactic for a local crew. They disable a truck, wait for it to break down a few miles later, and then move in to rob the driver and the cargo. The pickup had been shadowing me, just waiting for me to stop somewhere isolated. It's still the single most terrifying thing that's ever happened to me on the road. My gig is cooking the graveyard shift at a 24-hour diner that's a solid half-hour drive from my apartment. It's not exactly my dream job, but when you're out in the sticks, you can't be too picky. Beggars and choosers, you know? The diner itself is nothing to write home about, a classic greasy spoon, but the work is consistent, and most nights are quiet enough to let your mind wander. The night everything went sideways started just like any other. The shift was a blur of frying eggs and pouring coffee. After scrubbing the grill and locking the doors, I climbed into my beat-up sedan and pointed it toward home. The route is mostly a tangled mess of country roads that snake through dense woods and open fields. You almost never see another soul out there. No headlights, no streetlights, nothing. It's just you in the dark. I've always found a weird sort of peace in it. A chance to decompress and let the quiet wash over me after the clatter of the diner. But that night, the darkness felt different. It was a heavy, moonless black that seemed to swallow the beams from my headlights. I remember thinking it was like driving through a tunnel of ink. The air was unnaturally still, and the fog clung to the ground in thick, soupy patches, forcing me to ease up on the gas. I could only see a dozen feet or so in front of me, and my high beams were useless, just reflecting a solid wall of white that made my eyes ache. My commute was already going to be longer than usual, and I could feel my exhaustion turning into irritation. I was about halfway there when I first saw it. Off in the trees to my left, a single point of cold blue light pulsed with a slow, steady rhythm. My first thought was that it was some kind of weird property marker, or maybe a reflection off a piece of forgotten machinery. But as I drove on, it didn't recede or get any closer. It just hung there in the darkness, pulsing in perfect time, as if it were tethered to my car, matching my pace from deep within the woods. A knot of unease started to tighten in my gut. It was impossible to judge the distance. The fog and the oppressive dark were playing tricks on my eyes, making it feel both a mile away and right outside my window. After another minute of this silent blue companion keeping perfect pace with me, a genuine sense of dread began to creep in. There was something profoundly unnatural about it. I decided to test it, letting my foot off the accelerator and letting the car slow to a crawl. The light didn't falter. It slowed with me, its rhythmic pulse never changing, maintaining its exact position relative to my car. Whatever it was deliberately matching my speed. That's when my unease blossomed into full-blown fear. I brought the car to a complete stop in the middle of the deserted road, my heart hammering against my ribs, and just as I expected, the light stopped too, hanging there in the void, pulsing. I sat there for a moment, my mind racing, trying to process what I was looking at. Then, it changed. The pulsing continued, but the light itself began to warp with each beat, elongating vertically, stretching into a thin bright line before collapsing back into a point of light. It was like it was breathing. That was it for me. I wasn't sticking around for the encore. I slammed the gear shift into drive, ready to floor it, but when I stomped on the gas, nothing happened. The engine hadn't just stalled, it was completely dead. The silence in the car was absolute. I know I didn't turn the key. My hands had been gripping the wheel in a white-knuckled death grip. My hands were trembling, which never happens. I'm a line cook. Steady hands are part of the job description. While I was frantically turning the key in the ignition, getting nothing but a dead click in response, I couldn't shake the feeling that the thing outside was responsible. Again and again I tried, but the engine was lifeless. All the while that blue light pulsed faster and faster, the vertical stretching becoming more frantic and aggressive, as if it were getting excited. My breath was coming in ragged gasps. I was utterly alone, miles from anywhere. In a last-ditch effort, I grabbed my phone to try and record it, or maybe even call for help, though I knew there was no service out there. The screen was black. I jabbed the power button. Nothing. It was dead. I had charged it before my shift. I knew it had over 80% battery left. Now, it was as dead as my car. Before I could even process that, the light suddenly stopped pulsing. It contracted into an impossibly small bright point and then erupted, expanding into a silent, blinding dome of pure white light that filled my entire field of vision. It didn't hurt my eyes, it just erased everything. I squeezed my eyes shut, throwing an arm over my face, but it made no difference. I could still see the light, or the absence of everything else. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a few seconds, it was gone, just gone. The inky blackness of the night returned, the fog still clinging to the road. There was nothing in the woods. Shaking, I turned the key one more time. The engine roared to life instantly. I didn't hesitate. I drove the rest of the way home, eyes locked forward, terrified that if I even glanced at the rearview mirror, I'd see that awful blue pulse starting up again. Nothing else happened. I've tried to explain it to my friends, my brother, a few of the regulars at the diner. They all have their theories: ball lightning, a drone, some weird atmospheric phenomenon. But none of them feel right. None of them explain the dead car, the dead phone, or the feeling of being watched by something that wasn't part of our world.